Hello and welcome everyone to Blair Witch Minute, a podcast looking at 1999's seminal found footage horror movie, The Blair Witch Project, 1 minute at a time. I'm your host, Tony Black, and this episode's going to serve as a bit of an introduction to the podcast, to the film itself, and we're going to have a little look at any trailers that came out before and around when the movie came out in 1999. And I'm delighted that my first guest for this show is podcaster and host of a fascinating research project, a podcast named Scooby-Doo and movie podcast for your consideration, Mike Jozic, who will be with me for the first block of minutes. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I've probably mangled your surname there, haven't I?
No, actually, you said Jozic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Spot on, first time.
Yes! Well, I probably should tell listeners that I didn't get the Scooby-Doo podcast name right at least twice, maybe even more. So, you know, this just I'm just setting the standard, Mike, for what this podcast is going to be, really, you know, as host.
It's not a surprise. Nobody gets the podcast name Scooby-Doo right. They always say called Scooby-Doo or something, and it's based off of the show A Pup Named Scooby-Doo.
Right.
I thought that would, click in people's heads, but apparently it doesn't.
No, I think the problem is firmly with us, Mike. Don't worry. But we'll talk a little bit about this in a few minutes' time and about your other projects. But I asked you to come on as we're both members of the Movies by Minutes podcasters group, which is where we met, and I put a call out as somebody who has been a podcaster for a little while, and I've just finished, as we started recording this, and you guys might be listening to it a bit further down the line, but I've just finished my first minute project, which was a Fight the Future, the X-Files Fight the Future, the movie, minute, for the first X-Files movie from 1998, and I did that with a whole group of collaborators, different hosts, different guests, and it was really great. It was such a really brilliant experience. It took us over a year, and I loved the format. And ever since, I've listened to loads of the Minute podcasts, and I've got a little bit more involved in the Movies by Minutes community. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a few more of this. I really enjoy this style. And I was pretty surprised, Mike, that nobody had snapped up Blair Witch, because it's easily one of the most iconic movies of the 1990s, surely. So how has nobody done this yet?
I don't know. I mean, the film is kind of a cultural and cinematic benchmark, and yeah, sometimes I'm surprised by what is and isn't being done. Sometimes stuff, people might put their name in and they don't follow through with it. So I don't know if anybody maybe tried to do it at one point and gave up, but
yeah,
maybe. Yeah, hey, it was there and for the taking. So well done, sir.
Yeah, nabbed in. Yeah, jumped in. But I mean, what drew you to this this style of podcasting then? I mean, have you got any particular minute favourites that you've enjoyed?
I started with the Alien Minute. That first, I don't know if you want to call it season, but the commentary on the Alien film is honestly some of the best kind of I've heard. I'm a big fan of the movie, and I know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, and I think the length was also attractive because they weren't 2-hour episodes, and some people do take that kind of 2-hour route, and these guys were doing sort of 10 to 20 minutes, so I could listen to it, quick car drives, and it was great. And it was already done, so there was 100 and some episodes to just blast through. And also tried the Star Wars Minute and the Buckaroo Banzai 5 minutes, and just kind of, I mean, once you start, it's like heroin. You just start moving your way through your favorite movies, and I'm not sure how many I've actually finished to the end, because sometimes I'll get you get 100 episodes or 50 episodes into something, and something else grabs your attention, and you move to something else, but you always come back to it.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking. I keep wondering if anyone's ever going to do Showa Minute. Can you imagine that? How long is that? 800 minutes? Something crazy like that.
My co-host and I, we actually talked about, we're both, I use the term fans loosely because there are movies that are amazing that are very difficult to watch, and we're both, air quote, fans of Martyrs and Irreversible.
Oh wow, yeah.
And we wondered what tackling one of those in a minute by minute format would be like. And we decided it would probably just be self-harm.
Oh, God. Yeah, I mean, that... Blair Witch is intense at times, but man alive, it's got nothing on those films.
I'm still kind of tempted. I mean, like, that rape scene with Monica Bellucci in dead center in Irreversible's 9 minutes long. So trying to, like, talk about that for 9 episodes.
9 episodes. I mean, that'd be literally, like, nearly over 2 hours worth of discussion.
Like, it felt like insanity. So
yeah. I mean, you're a brave man if you ever try that, absolutely. But somebody I think will do these things, though, one day. I mean, the amount of podcasts that, you know, as you say, haven't necessarily finished or are just getting off the starting grid. You know, on the podcast network that this podcast part of, We Made This, we've got a Labyrinth podcast in development, and that's something that's now one we were surprised hadn't been done and almost had been done by somebody else, but then it sort of didn't get off the starting grid. So there's just so many. I mean, I've got about half a dozen more, Mike, you know, that I already want to do after this. So it's great. I mean, what do you think you would go for? I mean, if it wasn't for things like, you know, Martyrs or Irreversible, is there anything particularly that leaps out at you that you would do?
Well, we are locked in to do Silent Hill.
Oh, cool. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
my
roommate's a huge fan of the games. He's got, like, this encyclopedic knowledge of that end, and I'm a fan of Christoph Gans, and we both really appreciate that film, and we feel like the movies by minute format it's kind of a nice way to sort of advocate for a film, because you can take a film that maybe doesn't get a lot of love, and you could go through it slowly, minute by minute, and really just deconstruct it and break it down and talk about the themes and the style, and for anybody who's kind of curious, it can give you a new appreciation for the storytelling or the visuals or whatever. Absolutely,
yeah. It's really forensic, isn't it? So yeah, it's going to be fun doing this with Blair Witch. So I suppose the best place to start with this first episode, because we're not actually covering the first minute yet. This is an introduction, and we're going to talk a little bit about our relationship to the movie, a little bit of formative background information to the movie, and what we thought of the trailers, basically. So this might be a slightly extended version, actually, of the podcast, and we'll roughly aim to keep it at around between 10 and 20 minutes, but we'll see how we go. But yeah, I mean, what is your overall feeling about Blair Witch then, Mike? I mean, you know, are you somebody who loves it unreservedly, or do you have reservations? Or because, you know, a wide variety of opinions on this movie are going to be welcome in this podcast. If anyone's a little bit unsure about it or loves certain things and doesn't love others, it's cool. So it's all about understanding what that makes the movie tick. So what is your relationship to it? When did you first see it, and what do you think of it overall?
Well, I first became aware of it when its first marketing campaign sort of hit the internet, and there was all the talk about, is this real? Is this, you know, it was a really, really successful viral marketing campaign, and I believe it was the first film to really use the internet as a marketing tool, and at least in a really kind of effective, interactive way. And it really caught my interest. And I do remember actually watching the Curse of the Blair Witch documentary.
Love that. I love that so much.
It's so good. I've argued it's actually better than the film itself.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree, Mike. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And I held off on watching the film for a long time because I don't know if you know how sometimes when things are too popular and you kind of like withdraw. I think I might have thought of it a little too critically at the time, especially when I found out that, oh, okay, no, it is fake. This isn't like documentary stuff. And it took a few more years for me to actually come around to watching it in its entirety. And I do remember the first time I sat down, my brother had seen it, and he said he got motion sickness.
Yeah.
I don't remember when I actually saw it. It was probably like a year or two later. Grabbed the DVD and watched it, and there were things I liked about it. I did think it was somewhat unremarkable at the time, and I think a lot of that also had to do with the fact that, you know, it was this huge blockbuster phenomenon that I mean, it made $250 million off a $60 million or $60,000 budget.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Everybody was like, this is the scariest movie of all time. And I'm like, well, have you seen The Exorcist?
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I had this kind of like, I won't say complicated relationship with the film, but I have a lot of appreciation for it, and I've developed appreciation for it since. I still think it is a flawed film. I still think that there were things that could have been done to make it more terrifying or more maybe effective. But I also understand the process that Dan Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez were using to make the film, and how in a way they were sort of dealing with found footage, because they were kind of directing the action, but they weren't actually, directing it. Like, they were sort of separate from it and then editing it afterwards. So I found that fascinating, and kind of the film fascinates me sort of on a process level. And it's why I sort of come back to it, and I'll listen to the commentaries and I'll watch the documentary. And so yeah, like, the film is part of that, and I'm sort of more a fan of the phenomenon than I am of the film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely, yeah. It still remains genuinely innovative. I mean, for the time, a lot of people I remember at the time, because I remember watching it when I was, how old was I? 17 at the time. And I remember going to the cinema to see it because I'd heard all year, I was reading the magazines at that point. It was things like Empire, Total Film in the UK. And I've been reading the magazines, and everyone's talking about the infamous Cannes Film Festival showing where people were apoplectic and running out and being sick and all this kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I've got to see this when it comes out. And it came out Halloween in the UK. I don't know if it was exactly the same in the US, but it came out around Halloween in the UK, 1999. And I went to see it, and I was genuinely chilled and freaked out like a lot of people. But I remember that the hyperbole around it at the time, and how people were saying it was, like you say, it was scarier than The Exorcist. And to be honest, at the time I hadn't seen The Exorcist. I only saw The Exorcist, I think, about maybe 10 years ago, something like that. I'm now like 38, so this is a long time ago. I heard all that, but I didn't have any frame of reference, I guess, at the time. And I was just sort of developing as a film fan and learning things as well, like I still am, to be fair, but especially back then as a teenager. So it really was innovative, though, in, like you say, the way they filmed it, the way they established it, the way they had this micro budget, and the way the film essentially transformed the sort of confluence between indie filmmaking and blockbuster filmmaking, in the sense that, in the 90s you'd had studios like Miramax who had transformed the sort of indie label into being something steadily profitable. Their name is Mud now, or one name is Mud, but the Weinsteins particularly did make a big dent, following things like Pulp Fiction, and then onwards into very different fare like Shakespeare in Love, during the 90s, where they had these properties that were not astronomically made movies in terms of budget, but then they went on to be big hits and Oscar winners and all this kind of thing. And then you had the works of Kevin Smith, which was quite low budget, and all this stuff happening, all this build-up, all the Sundance Film Festival circuit and all that kind of thing with all these movies. And then the Blair Witch comes along, which is something that's made incredibly cheaply and makes the kind of money back then. I mean, adjusted, I don't know what it is adjusted for inflation right now, but it would be big money, in terms of what the franchises make, I think, or getting on for that now. So in that sense, Blair Witch was revolutionary, I think. Whether or not the like you say, the methods of the film, and there's always been big debate, hasn't there, about whether or not the film is actually good. Whether or not it's actually technically well made, whether it's got any real worth. And I think that all comes down to the personal preference to some extent, I think, in terms of what you think about found footage and all this kind of thing. But I think there's no way that anyone can deny really the impact that it had back then, and it still had. I mean, it spawned 20 years of imitators, and none of which I don't think have ever really come close to tapping into what Blair Witch in a way did at the time.
They kind of blew open the door for an entire subgenre that, like, they didn't invent found footage. There were movies prior to it, like The Last Broadcast, which I think was just the year before that, and like 10 years before, or 15 years before. I can't remember when Cannibal Holocaust came out, but that was another one that was...
early 80s, I think it was, Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah.
Like that.
And that also dealt with kind of the found footage concept. So, I mean, it wasn't... They didn't create it, but the film popularized it. It showed sort of the possibilities of it. And again, mentioning the internet marketing, like the way that you could use a micro-budgeted film and just blow the doors wide open. And I mean, we could probably spend the next 2 hours just listing off found footage films off the top of our head.
Yeah. I mean, the next big one, I think, really, that had a dent in that market was Paranormal Activity, which was nearly around 10 years later. But that in itself wasn't the Blair Witch Project in terms of the reach it had, in terms of, you know, how it took a very sort of loose genre of horror that hadn't really been primed much. Like you say, those examples are absolutely on the money there for previous found footage films. But the concept of found footage as a marketable, profitable genre that has, for many, been milked to death. I mean, I love it. I'm a big fan of found footage, and you put any kind of found footage in front of me, and I'll lap it up. Really, it doesn't matter if it's good or not. You know, I'll enjoy it. But before then, that hadn't really happened. So I think it's created its own, you know, industry of horror essentially. But it still remains quite a seminal experience. And like you say, you know, the fact that the marketing of it was fascinating as well, and the way that they made people believe it was real, ultimately, you know, and the way they cast it with, you know, putting ads in the paper. There's a great, there's an ad, I'll read this ad that they put in, and this was the one that Heather Donahue saw, which was, "You are about to read for the most demanding and unpleasant project of your career. If you are cast, we are going to drag you into the woods for 7 days of hell. 186 hours of real-time improvisational torment. We're not kidding. If you're not serious about your craft, then you're wasting your time and hours." In fact, I don't think that was an advert. I think it was the sheet that they get as they go into the audition. And I think that sort of sums it up, really, that they were dealing with something that was a unique experience, that they were taking real people, turning them into characters, but then pretending to the public that this was almost something unearthed that was terrifying and real. And I think that's genius, the way they even managed to pull that off. And I don't think they would today. I don't think they'd be able to do it today.
No, I think they were at this, like, point in history, and you know, nowadays, like, just the way we treat anything that we see on the internet, we view it with a lot of skepticism, and there's the ability you have to, like, track things down and track people down. Am I mistaken, or I remember hearing that the actors were asked to sort of, like, disappear and not do anything publicly for a little while the movie was in release?
I think so. I think that was the case. They were told to go to ground, and I don't even think they came to the premiere and things like that. I think they were and from what I remember, they were unhappy with this because they were worried it was going to damage their careers, because they were worried that, you know, casting directors, people in Hollywood would not realise they were actors and think they were dead.
Well, I didn't realise they were actors at the time. I literally just thought they were, like, friends of the filmmakers. Mm. Yeah, I don't think it was until I watched the commentary that I realised, oh, these are people they, like, hired, people who actually...
Yeah, people who had to audition for the remarkable things they put them through during the movie. But yeah, it's a pretty incredible film. I mean, I have always loved it. I have always really thought this film was great. But I think it's going to be really interesting in talking to the different podcasters and as well as yourself on this journey to unpick the bits that do work, the bits that don't work, to discuss the movie in general, because it isn't perfect by any means, and you will find that there are as many people who, you know, really dislike the Blair Witch as much as love it. I will never forget years and years ago when I was at university, and so this is more than 15 years ago, we were watching a DVD copy of the Blair Witch with a bunch of friends in someone's house, and it was night time. You know, it was like 10 o'clock at night. It wasn't in the middle of the day, and the people I were with were laughing their heads off at this film, and I was so angry. I just kept saying, "Stop laughing! You've got to." And one of my friends was like, "Oh, it's rubbish." And I was like, "Oh." And I've always maintained that I think you have to, in some way, buy into something like this. You have to be prepared to let yourself be taken away with it. And I don't think everyone wants to do that sometimes. I think there is a deliberate sort of avoidance of that. They don't want to get swept in. But that frustrated me, because those people will go off and go, "Oh, it's rubbish." And it's like, well, it's not rubbish. Even if it's not great and you didn't think it was a great film, laughing it off does it a disservice. But, you know, this was just something based on a memory of mine. But I do think not everyone wants to get carried away with horror, and particularly this kind of horror.
I do think that people also, they look at found footage and they don't realize that in a lot of ways it's harder to do a found footage film than it is to do a typical scripted narrative film, because the conceit that they used, you're struggling to continue the story that they want to tell, but they also want these random things to happen, and they're literally collecting. I mean, there's a few moments in the minutes we're going to be discussing coming up where they were dealing with what the actors gave them as far as footage, and it's their responsibility to kind of edit it together, and there's always this risk of sort of pushing the narrative too much and it doesn't feel natural anymore, or letting it be too natural and it doesn't push the narrative, and then you just kind of get lost. And it's this tightrope walk that you're doing between telling a story and perpetuating this idea of reality. And that's really hard. And this film, it succeeds and fails in equal measure on both of those counts. And most found footage films I've seen succeed or fail in some measure on that point. And it's funny sometimes where they succeed and fail, because it kind of also, it could tell you where the filmmaker's priorities are. I know some really decent found footage movies that all of a sudden at the end, they lose that naturalism. And you're like, okay, this is where the filmmaker's like, we just need to finish our story.
Yeah. In fact, I'd argue that and I really enjoyed this much more than most people, but I'd argue that the Adam Wingard sequel, Blair Witch, from a few years ago, exactly that falls into the same trap. I think, it very much by the end, it just wants to create this kind of wow ending. And I think it does a little bit of because it attempts to basically remake the ending of this film with a much bigger sort of scale, and much as I was in the cinema going, ooh, this is cool in terms of mythology, when I've watched it since, I'm like, yeah, but this is ridiculous. Whereas the end of the Blair Witch is one of the most terrifying endings of any movie ever. So yeah, I see your point. I think that is something that happens a lot, and I think found footage I think it's baked into the concept, isn't it, that you're never going to get it perfect. You're never going to be able to craft, like you say, an Exorcist, the way that Friedkin was able to craft that film, in terms of the scripting and everything like that, to make it a piece of art in many ways. I think with found footage, the whole point is that that's not what it is, in a way. So I think if it's too perfect, it loses itself. So I think that's quite a common trait for this subgenre.
Have you listened to the commentary for the Wingard film?
I might have done. It's been a while. I can't remember.
I had a very similar experience with both Blair Witch films, and at least the found footage ones. And I actually appreciate Book of Shadows. I'm like one of the outliers. I won't get into why I appreciate it, but I kind of dug how it tried to do something different. But the Wingard film and the Myrick Sanchez film, you kind of sort of take it at face value, but then when you sort of learn about the process, at least for me, like my appreciation for how they were doing it and what they were doing, it increased my appreciation of the film. And you commented on that final scene, and when I first watched it, it was just like, okay, here's a lot of running and a lot of shaky cam and a lot of whatever, but then to find out the process of that, I now think that ending of the most recent Blair Witch is kind of a tour de force of found footage filmmaking, and what that actor went through was insane. And I think it's a really powerful ending now. So it's interesting how, in ways, pulling the curtain back made me like the movie more.
You've made me want to go and re-listen to that now. I feel like I did. A while back, but it's been a while. I need to go back and listen to it again. But yeah, I mean, because I do really like that film, and it was lambasted heavily at the time, but I did really enjoy it, and I've got it on Blu-ray, and so I look forward to getting to that one day and talking more about it. But
that's another podcast.
That is another. Yeah, let's get this minute out of the way first. This this film, and we'll see about that later. But before we go, then let's briefly just talk about the trailers then, because obviously you've got the setup, and I think in the next minute we might go into a little bit more about some of the production side of things, but as well as the viral marketing, the screenings that people were screaming at and this kind of thing, you had the trailers as well at the time. Now, I don't know if you've seen these, Mike. I'm not sure you've seen these, but
I did buzz over the first trailer.
Right, okay.
Which is a fantastic trailer.
Which one was it? Because there's 2 teasers and there's 1 trailer on the Blu-ray. What kind of stuff did it have in it?
When I realized we were talking about the trailers, I hit YouTube and I'm watching. It's 1 minute and 20 seconds long. It's trailer number 1.
I'm not sure actually that one's on the Blu-ray, because I think on the Blu-ray there are 2 trailers that are about, certainly maybe this is the difference in terms of Blu-ray releases and things like that. The Blu-ray I've been following is one that was released in the UK, and it only has about 40-second trailers, and then I think it's a 47-second teaser.
Because I think Lionsgate has the license now, and this starts with the Lionsgate logo, so this might be kind of an updated trailer.
Could be. They're interesting. I don't know if you've got anything on there that has what the critics are saying, things like genuinely frightening and, you know, terrifying, and that because the one trailer I have has those things on it, which are just trying to. The whole point of the trailers I've seen is that it's trying to sell this as extremely mysterious and quite powerful. There's one as well which has the speech from Heather, and you don't see her for most of it, and it's just her where she's saying, "Tell Josh's mum I'm sorry, tell Mike's mum I'm sorry, it was my project," and you see her with the famous eye and half her face in the dark, and that's it. And then it's, you know, it cuts to the Blair Witch Project, and then the other one it's got bits taken from the Curse of the Blair Witch, actually, in terms of, you know, the news reports, the camera footage, the camera feet being found, and the police report and things like this. And then it's got something that isn't actually in the Curse of the Blair Witch, which is Mike's dad being interviewed, or I think it's Mike's dad or Josh's dad, and they're asking whether or not they think somebody says, "Do you think the occult is responsible for the disappearance of your son?" And that's where it cuts. And that's not in the Curse of the Blair Witch. I've seen the Curse of the Blair Witch so many times, I know that it's not in there. So they're interesting trailers, I think, and I don't know if it's similar from the one you saw, but they're definitely trying to create a sense that you don't need to know the plot. You just need to know that the mood and that something mysterious is going on. I think they do a good job as trailers. I think they establish a mood. I think they establish a mystery. I think they establish, you know, it's hard to really watch them now without and trying to put yourself in the mindset of someone who would have seen this in the summer of 1999.
Well, let me help you with that, Tony.
Go for it.
I do remember seeing them, and
oh, cool. Okay.
I don't think I saw them in theaters. I thought I saw them online. I think I went to like BlairWitch.com, so I was already sort of in that headspace that is this real or isn't this real? Because I didn't know the background behind it. And watching those trailers, I actually did, you know, get goosebumps watching them because, like you said, they played up the mystery, they played up the weirdness and the supernatural kind of element, and the fact that this thing could have happened, and this film is an artifact left over from this experience. And especially when you're viewing it online and you're on the website, that's essentially perpetuating this idea. It created a really interesting experience. I'm sure it would have been equally fascinating in the theater because you're in a dark room with hundreds of other people and a 60-foot screen, and you just have this thing like flashed at you for half a minute, and you're like, what did I just see? And of course it ends with the BlairWitch.com address, so I mean, people probably went home and went to the website and went through the same experience I did. But yeah, it was really effective. It was really, really effective, and it is genuinely what started my interest in the film as a whole.
Do you remember I think it was around 2006, where there was a film called The Devil Inside, and they finished the movie with a web address? Do you remember that?
I do not.
Well, probably for the best, because the film was quite rubbish. It was all about, like, it was like a possessed nun or something in the Vatican or something like that. But it ends on like a cut, Mike, and it directs people to a web address. And I remember people at the time going, "Oh, come on!" Like, it's one thing to have the BlairWitch.com at the end of a trailer and immerse you into this, you know, viral marketing, which is all fantastic. I love it when that happens. But to actually end a film with where the answer to the end of the movie is on a web page is like this kind of stuff gone mad. So, yeah, I think the detractors from what Blair Witch started, I think, would point to the devil inside and say, this is what you did. But So yeah, let's leave it there then. We'll finish that as a little intro. I think this has been really good to sort of give general impression of the movie and the sort of world building around it and things like that. And when we come back in the next episode, we're going to start talking about the film from the very beginning, from minute 0 essentially, or minute 1 as we'll probably label it as. But yeah, it's been great. It's been great to start this with you, Mike, and discuss this with you.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're going to be back for the next one, which is going to be fantastic.
Amazingly, you're going to have me back.
It would be a pleasure of mine. And yeah, we'll talk about your podcast projects at the end of your little block of episodes. Well, how this is going to work is we're going to get different people on for different blocks, roughly equating a chunk of scenes, or a scene generally. So you're going to be with me for at least the first 5 minutes, Mike, which is great. And then we'll get another guest in. So towards the end of that, we'll talk about your projects and things like that. But what I would say to everybody is if you're not following us on social media, follow us at Blair Witch Min on Twitter. That's going to be our main base. We may be on Facebook as well at some point. But also check out the Movies by Minutes group, definitely, on Facebook. It's fantastic. All you got to do is type in Movies by Minutes and you should be able to find it on there. So that's really good. Thanks for listening to our first episode of Blair Witch Minute. We hope you'll stick with us on the journey as we explore the film. Just quickly remember, we're part of the We Made This podcast network, and the Blair Witch Project isn't the only thing we're talking about. So we'll give you a sneak peek at what else is on the network in a minute. But until next time, thanks for listening and stay out of the woods. Elsewhere on We Made This. The Movie Palace.
Just in very general terms, general thoughts, like, is this a good book? Is this something we would recommend that people go out and spend their hard-earned money on?
Well, if you're going to spend money on a book like this, which is a larger format, sort of like a coffee table book, but a little more compact, you want to look at the quality of it. I mean, the content, I think, is really good in terms of, the breadth and scope of it. It goes from 1921 to 1976. You really get a good range of letters and missives.
We dig music.
Kayfabe, it's originally a wrestling term, but it gets used a lot in describing tropes in entertainment and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Basically, it's like staying in character. So it's like The Undertaker, if he met a kid doing a signing, he would stay in character as this, I'm a big scary goth guy. Whereas when he got home, he'd probably, put shorts and t-shirt on and, listen to the Bee Gees or whatever. And Manowar are one of those bands that kayfabe is sort of what they do.
Yeah.
So they're playing characters.
Frame to frame.
Michael Jordan is clearly playing a version of himself, which is very hard for somebody to do on screen, especially when acting opposite nothing. But Bob Hoskins made it look extremely effortless when he was acting opposite the cartoons. And you look at even now, the Paddington films, they're acting opposite a tennis ball on a stick, that just for eye lines. So it can be done extremely well, but I think a lot of people will struggle. And I think clearly, as you mentioned, Michael Jordan struggles with that aspect of it.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.